I didn't go to war with myself after I got out. I was at war with myself from the very beginning.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest who's someone who was once a top-tier special operations soldier, mastering counterterrorism missions and living by the warrior code. But when a mission in Sadir City went sideways, everything changed. What followed wasn't just physical recovery, it was an identity crisis, a mental war, and a chaotic spiral that nearly destroyed him. He's since become a pioneer in veterans' mental health, a director, actor, and producer on SEAL Team, and the creator of a theory that challenges everything we think we know about PTSD. And now, he's telling it all in his raw, unfiltered book, Forged in Chaos, coming this July. Ladies and gentlemen, without further introduction, Tyler Gray. Tyler, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have you. I have so many questions to ask. I did a couple of research about you. Your book sounds really interesting. I want to first dive into, because I feel like this is something that people might want to know right away. As I mentioned, you created this theory about PTSD, the challenges, everything about it. What do we get wrong about PTSD, and what is the truth that nobody talks about?
Like anything, it's complicated, but I'll say this. I'll try and make it simple, and that is PTSD absolutely exists. I'm not saying it doesn't. What I am saying is a couple things. One is it's a symptom. It's not the disease. Two, actually, I'm saying three things. One, it's a symptom. It's not the disease. Two, it's not veterans' problem. And what I mean by that is it can't be veterans' problem. Who can have PTSD? Anyone. For what? Pretty much anything. So if anyone can have PTSD for anything, then by definition, it cannot logically be veterans' problem. It just can't be. It just doesn't make sense. We got to look at what PTSD really is, to be honest, which is a catch-all phrase. Really, it's an all-encompassing phrase for insurance billing in mental health space. I'm sorry, we could act like that's not true, but it is. The third thing is it's not a disorder. The problem with calling it a disorder, and look, some people look at the disorder term, and look at it as shameful and negative, and they want it to be called PTS. And I don't have a problem with, it's not hurting my, if you use the term disorder, I don't see it as a reflection of myself. But what the problem with that word is, a disorder isn't curable. The problem with the cluster of symptoms that we're calling PTSD, and we're saying that you have PTSD forever, and you're going to have to get treated in this way. And this partner and some other stuff I'm doing, I'm a partner with a doctor named Dr. Eugene Lipoff, who's an expert in the PTSD field, and he's advocating to change it to PTI, post-traumatic injury. I wholeheartedly agree with him. And the impetus of this movement is saying that PTSD is not a disorder, or PTS, whatever you want to call it. It is an injury. It's a physical injury to the nervous system. And if we reclassify it as an injury and treat it as an injury, and people see it as an injury, then we understand that it can be treated and fixed, and then you can move on. It's not a disorder that's a sentence forever. So those are a few of the things that I address about PTSD, whatever you want to call it. I was diagnosed with PTSD in, I don't know what year, 2008, 9, something like that. And they told me what it was. And I was like, I don't think that's what I'm experiencing. And I was just told that's what it is. Every problem you have is that's your only problem. That's the disease. And it's taking me years to figure out that wasn't the specific problem I was experiencing. And I had to come up with my own answers to what I was feeling and make sense of what I was feeling rather than what I was told I should be feeling.
Always find it interesting when we have to step in. I feel like lately a lot of us are all stepping in to be our own advocates and doctors. It's like I'm constantly like trying to find that one doctor that just kind of doesn't just prescribe me a medication, because first of all, I'm not taking it anyway, but someone that understands that there's more to what this one box, or you're putting me in for insurance billables. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a money game. That's it.
Yeah, and again, I mean, you and I are preaching the choir with each other here. It's like we could say, we could act like it's something different, but that is what it is. And again, we have to be aware of what the system is, how the system works, and then we have to find our own answers. I agree with you. There's a ton of people who are doing exactly what you just said, which is what I did, probably what you did, and I have a couple reasons on why I think that's happening. But fundamentally, I would argue a major difference between now and, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago is information exists on the internet. You know what I mean? Like 25, 30 years ago, the doctor told you something and you went, okay. Because you didn't have the ability to, you could go get a second opinion. And by the way, what's a second opinion? It's literally what I just said. It's another doctor's opinion on what it is. It's not a fact. It's just their opinion. And so now we're able to do our own research. And the thing I learned from my injury that you spoke about earlier is, at the end of the day, I don't care. A doctor, they can have, they could graduate top of their class, but no one knows your health better than you, period. You are the default expert in how you feel. You're the default expert in your medical history. You are the default expert in your body. So you have to be your own patient advocate, and you have to be your own, for lack of a better term, medical caseworker. You have to be your own, doctor manager, for lack of a better term, right? And you can take the information that the doctors give you, but you have to have some level of advocation of your own care. If not, you're going to be all over the place. And I was for many years, until I stepped up and took charge of my own, not just physical care, but mental health care as well.
I want to talk about leading up to all this, because I know we jumped in right there, but I want to now go backwards in a little bit in terms of your going into special operations and what that was like for you, why you decided to go that route. Can you touch on that a little bit? And then I'm going to dive deeper into that.
Yeah. So, for me, the way I explain it, I mean, as a child, there were two things I wanted to do. And I'll say them both, and one will come to play later. But, the two things I wanted to do was be in special operations in the military, and the other was work in movies. And I mean, I'm going back, people have asked me timeline. I mean, I'm talking I remember having this conversation at, I'd be in the third grade. So I'm really bad at children's ages, but I was having these conversations about those two things in the third grade. So as far back as I can remember, that was there. And definitely I can remember probably before that. I just remember having an actual conversation about it at that age. So for me, those were the two things I wanted to do. And they were also interrelated, if I'm being honest. And how I mean that is, I watched, First Blood, the Stallone movie, probably 36 times as a kid. And I'll say this, and it's going to sound crazy, but just go with it because it's true. I watched a movie like First Blood with Stallone, and I saw his character go crazy at the end, and I saw the trauma that the character experienced. And as a kid, that was attractive to me. I wanted that. I wanted that level of chaos. I wanted that level of, I think probably at the time, the thing about that movie is he's very dangerous in that movie, and he's feared. And I think at the time I was getting picked on a lot. And so maybe I saw a character who was feared, and that felt like a good counter to what I was experiencing in my daily life of getting picked on. And I thought, if I was feared, that would be better. And then at the same time, while I'm watching, First Blood and going, I want to be a Green Beret, at the very same time, I'm watching it and going, gosh, I love film. I love this movie. I love this storytelling. I would watch scenes and go, that's a great scene. Again, from a very early age. So it was a very synergistic effect for me as a kid. And I'm using First Blood, but I could give 10 examples of movies that were really kind of how I forged, to the point that you said earlier, I really forged my identity at least my masculine identity off of movies and characters that I saw. And I thought that's what, it was like to be a man, was what those characters portrayed. And so I tried to emulate that.
Movies, TV, it has such an influence, right? It just,
I still don't think, I've worked enough in the industry now. I don't think the industry really, some people do, but I would say by and large, let me rephrase. I think the creatives in the industry understand the power that it has. The business people, in my experience, don't understand, which is a very interesting dichotomy. And it makes sense, obviously, why. But it's like being in the military, psyops. I tell people all the time, Hollywood is the largest psyops campaign in the history of the world, and yet it operates that way without a real acceptance that it operates that way, which is kind of scary in a way, because it has real power.
Oh my gosh.
You got to take it seriously.
Be careful what you're watching, right? And then also what your kids are watching. I have a nephew, and I'm always thinking about what we don't do. I really rarely ever do TV. And it's funny because I work in the film business as well.
Yeah.
And I don't watch TV. I don't watch it at all. And it's so funny though, because sometimes for work, I have to, because
I do the same.
We're pitching a show or a movie that I'm putting together. People are like, you should really watch this, making sure, all this other stuff. And that's the only, aside from that, I'm rarely doing it because I got other things. It's so easy to get sucked in. And like you said, I could relate to your First Blood story in terms of The Outsiders was what did it for me. It's and then it's funny too, because I'm all joining a gang, I'm all this, but the thing is that, and then fast forward to when I ended up working for Ralph Macchio, and it was I couldn't stop talking about The Outsiders because I felt like he was because the guy doesn't age. It's he looked
he is a freak of nature. Him and
oh my God.
Wolf.
And then it's just so funny too, because again, as a child, you end up taking on that identity of what you're watching. And then, like I said, then you end up, and then you work in the business and you realize what an impact. So I want to ask you, as we're talking about all this, as a special operator, you're trained to be untouchable, right? So at what point did that moment become was that illusion shattered for you essentially?
So if you kind of, I'll try and do a 30-second compressed kind of evolution of me. So if you think child who was I was a very sensitive kid. I got picked on a lot. I was just too nice, quite frankly, in multiple ways. I decided, that I was going to become this other person. So if you really look at the core of that, what I really just said was I was a kid who didn't really know who he was. I really didn't have a very strong identity. When I went and joined the military really wants you. If you come in with no identity, the military goes, awesome, because we're going to give you one in either way. We don't care if you brought one or if you didn't bring one, here's a new one. So the military gives you an identity, and it reinforces the value of that identity. And the military says you have value while you're doing this job. If you're a good member of the team, if you give and never take away, then you have value, you're good, and that's your identity. The higher you go, I would argue, in the military, the more specific, the more elite units, the stronger that branding of that identity is. Once you get to, where I got to, which was, one of the most elite units in the military, I very much had an insane amount of confidence in that identity. And why wouldn't I? Then you go to combat and it just gets reinforced over and over. And you're shoulder to shoulder with guys that are just true legends and people that you respect. And then you're with them. So you go, well, I respect them and they have value. So I must, because, that's we're a team. And it works until you get out. And for me, getting blown up and getting put out of the military, medically retired, that identity was yanked away from me. And the irony, maybe irony is not the right word, but the real issue was that for years, I thought that I had lost my identity when I got out. And a lot of men and women who are in the military will talk about loss of identity. it is my opinion that it's not a true loss of identity. I believe it's the recognition. I think it's a better way to say it is I think it's a loss of a false identity.
Okay.
I think the real core issue is that you didn't have an identity to begin with, and you joined seeking an identity, and then it gave you one, and then it took it away. But we're all looking at it going, oh, like I knew who I was and I lost it. And my argument is, I don't think I know I didn't know who I really was. And if somebody can give you an identity and you can be so messed up from it being taken away, I'm going to argue logically that was not your real identity. I'm going to argue that you never had one.
From hearing you, in terms of didn't have an identity, created an identity, went into the military, they gave me a new identity. I left the military, another new identity happening. What's something that you did along the process that changed everything for you? Like, is there something that you did along the way that kind of changed it all for you?
Yeah, for me, so I'm going to, I use identity obviously multiple times, but another way you could describe identity is worth. Another way, I'll just re-say what I said in a different way, which is you're a person who doesn't have any worth. You're seeking worth. You join the military, and the military goes, as long as you're doing this, you have worth. And you go, okay, awesome. And everything is fine while you're doing that job because you feel that you have worth. Externally, everyone's telling you have worth while you're there. Then you get out, and then suddenly, where's your worth? Because your worth was tied to a job. It wasn't tied to who you were intrinsically. So what I did, or the process that I went through, I mean, and again, I can talk to you right now about it, backwards and forwards. But the reality is it took me years and years, probably decades, if I'm being honest, to figure out all these problems and where again, it's very easy for a lot of people talk. A lot of people talk, they'll act like they're talking about problems, but if you really boil it down, most people are talking about symptoms. I would argue very few people have done a deep enough dive to understand what the core disease is. And where I started doing work and I started looking into myself, and I took a hard look at myself for a long time and asked some hard questions and came to some hard truths. And it took me years to realize that identity, all those things, yeah, they're issues, but the core disease and what the book is about at its core is a lack of self-worth. And if you look at the title of the book, which is Forged in Chaos, my argument is when you are a child that is raised in a chaotic environment, a child feels that they're responsible for their environment. So if it's chaotic, a child knows that's not good. So the takeaway is I must be responsible for this environment, what's happening to me. Therefore, I must not be good. I have no value because if I did, it wouldn't be this chaotic, crazy environment. So lack of self-worth, I'm convinced, is the true core disease. And then everyone just looks at all the symptoms, but I think that's the underlying fundamental issue.
I love how you just mentioned, your book and the title, because I wanted to talk about your book, and one of my questions I wanted was what the significance of the title is, Forged in Chaos. And I feel like you answered it, but if you wanted to deep dive into it further, please feel free.
Yeah. So fundamentally, it's my theory is that, and again, I'll use PTSD as an example. So many people, PTSD. The problem with PTSD to me is that it assumes a normal baseline. Okay. So the only way that you could have PTSD, which is a crazy event happens, and then because of that crazy event happens, your nervous system's all messed up and you live in this state of hypervigilance because you're expecting or your nervous system is worried that that event's going to happen again. The assumption, though, that people don't talk about is to have PTSD, you have to have a normal baseline of being calm and calm. What I realized over time was I can't have PTSD traditionally, at least in that sense, because I don't have a basis of calm. I have a basis of chaos. So therefore, I am not a person who has a normal baseline that can have something crazy, and then I'm worried about something crazy happening again. for me, when crazy stuff happens, and it's in the book how I realized this. It's a long story. I won't get into it now, but you can read it if you want in there. But yeah. There's the how I came to this conclusion is laid out. It was a crazy situation, but because I have a chaotic baseline, when chaos happens, I don't get chaotic. I get calm.
Yeah.
And that is the core. And by the way, again, it goes way beyond the military. This truth is for anyone who was raised in a chaotic environment. And you see it. And by the way, we all know if you're a person when everything is going crazy in the environment, if you're calm in your mind, I'm going to bet highly more than likely you were raised in a chaotic environment. And then what happens is when you're forged in chaos is and by the way, when I came up with this idea, there was no science to back what I'm saying. There is now actual science to back what I'm saying, although it didn't really matter for me. I knew the truth of it. But now we know that I figured out basically that as a child born in or raised in chaos, my brain was doing something. It's a survival mechanism. So my brain was rewiring itself to be calm in chaos.
Right.
Why? Because it had to. So then that fundamental rewiring happens. And now for the rest of my life, my brain, when the environment is chaotic, my brain is calm. When the environment is calm, my brain is chaotic. So how do I calm myself? Simple. Mm-hmm. I create chaos in the environment. Because when I create chaos and I fuck everything up, now I'm calm again. Again, years of this behavior. And I still can do it. I still am prone to these same behaviors. But now I'm much better at seeing them for what they are, which is creating chaos rather than pure self-destruction or pure, I don't know why I'm doing this. I now know why. And I go, oh my God, I'm just creating chaos, right? My default mechanism of my brain being completely relaxed, the more chaos in the environment, the more calm I am. What does creating chaos look like? Simple: drinking, freaking buying a motorcycle and riding 120 miles an hour, getting to arguments with your significant other, causing issues at work, everything you can think of. They're all mechanisms to create chaos in the environment to get back to that fundamental rewiring from childhood, which is the homeostasis of being calm mentally once the environment is chaotic.
So for you, it's like your brain recognizes chaos as it being safe, and peace.
You said it perfectly. But let me add to that. You're right, but I'll say it differently. Very specifically, it's my nervous system. My nervous system, my fight or flight ANS system, sees chaos as safety. And why does it see it as safety? Because that was the default mode. Exactly. So, and by the way, PTSD, the fundamental, one other fundamental problem I'll mention about PTSD is based on events. PTSD is not based on environments. The huge flaw, as far as I'm concerned, in a PTSD diagnosis is that it doesn't take into account multiple events over time. It just says one event. And PTSD, to be actually diagnosed, it has to be diagnosed on one event. So for me, when I'm talking to psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists, they're looking for the one event in my wartime history in their mind that is going to cement my PTSD issues. And that's just not the way it works for me. My problem wasn't my combat experience. My problem was my chaotic childhood and my lack of self-worth. So everything that they were dealing with in wartime is simply a symptom, not the disease. And you'll never cure the disease by treating symptoms.
Right. You got to get to the root. So, okay, you're so good at answering like so many of my questions as you're talking. I love it. I'm trying. So here's what if someone is addicted to chaos, someone's listening to the show and they're like, oh my God, that's me. What is the first step in breaking that cycle? And you did mention you're self-aware now where okay, I'm creating chaos, right? But how do you then step back? I feel like self-awareness is probably the first step, but I could be wrong. And then
you're right. You're right.
But then what do you do to then, or what do you, I'm sure everyone's different, what might work for you, might not work for somebody else, but then what is the steps that you do to then stop that from happening? And was there something that surprised you about your mind and your nervous system when you trained your body to live in the peace?
Yes. Okay. So the first part of your question, you were right. Awareness is step one, and awareness, at least in this capacity, is a pretty big deal. Like, I can tell you, when I became aware of what I was doing, it suddenly gave me the agency of choice where before I hadn't.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'm about to create chaos. I was then able to see it for what it was, rather than I just do it. I suddenly was like, oh my gosh, I know what I'm about to, or I know what I want to do, whatever. And then it allowed me to go, do I really want to do that? Just in the awareness, at least for me, it gave me some level of choice over my actions, which obviously is huge. Step two, very simple, buy the book. No, I'm just kidding. No, that'll help. But
listening to you, though, by the way, like, I'm excited for your book to come out. I feel like, I mean, I wasn't forged in chaos, but I didn't have a chaotic childhood. But I just feel like we just, as human beings, just naturally sometimes just create problems that we don't need to create. And I just feel like your book is relatable for a lot of people.
Well, that's what I tried to make. I didn't want to make it. Obviously, I started, with veterans because that's my background. But by the end of the book, it's really saying that we're all people that have this core are essentially the same. That being said, let me mention it because I don't know if it applies to you, but it might apply to somebody else. So I'll mention it here. I've talked to now quite a few people about chaos in childhood, and what I've learned is that there's quite a few people that had chaotic childhoods that don't realize that their childhoods were chaotic. And what I mean by that is, okay, did your parents beat you every day? No. Okay, well, I didn't have a chaotic childhood. I had good parents. Somebody could say like, oh, I had a good childhood. Like, I'll give you an example. This just happened to me, I don't know, 5 days ago. I was talking to a guy. Based on everything he was saying, I'm like, dude, you were forged in chaos. I'm telling you. And he's like, no, the childhood stuff doesn't make sense. And I'm like, well, and I was going back and forth. And finally I was like, he said his parent, or I think his dad, I forget, was in the military. And I'm like, did you move a lot when you were a child? And he goes, oh yeah, every 6 months. And I was like, well, there you go. I'm like, and he goes, what do you mean? Because his parents were very loving and they were great, parents. But I'm like, dude, you moved every 6 months. That's a new school. It's a new town. That's new friends. That's chaos to a child.
Yeah.
I can tell you for myself, when I was 10, I moved when I was 10. That messed me up as a kid. I was a new group of friends, all the things I just said, but that was very hard for me, that move. It really messed me up. And I was, and that was one move. And this guy's moving every 6 months. And I'm like, dude, that's level 10 chaos to a child. Yeah. And he was just like, I never thought about it like that. You're right, but I never thought about it. And I present, there's something called big T and little T trauma. Big T is your parents beat you every day. Little T would be you moved a lot as a kid. Kids only know what they know. And so, we're very much prone to trauma that we don't necessarily recognize as trauma at the time. That's another, you could write a whole book on that subject. But I'm sorry, you said
creating the peace, like what you specifically do once you're aware of it. What do you do to then live in?
Yeah. So after awareness, it's at least for me, and there's multiple things, but a huge, I can't stress how big this is an acceptance, or an awareness and then an acceptance that, let's just say, traumatic childhood. We are told that the solution to a traumatic childhood is mental health services, talk therapy, so on and so forth. Maybe EMDR, blah, 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 blah. Not accurate. Not true. Or I shouldn't say not true. What I will say, it's more complicated than that. When we're talking about a fundamental chaos wiring, what we're saying is there is a fundamental rewiring, reverse wiring, miswiring, whatever you want to call it, of the nervous system. Mm-hmm. Your nervous system is fundamentally broken. And therefore, the treatment can't just be mental. It has to be mental combined with physical. And the reason is because the problem is some mental trauma combined with a messed up nervous system. The way the current, and you and I started talking about this on the call, the way the current, Western medicine system works is everything is fractured. There are specialists. No one is doing the all-encompassing treatment that treats everything at the same time. But the reality that mental health care doesn't seem to accept or understand is that, I know this is going to sound crazy, but the brain resides in the body. It's in the body. And it's ludicrous to think that you can treat the brain and not have to treat the body to some degree at the same time. And when you're talking about, being forged in chaos and that rewiring, what I can tell you works is treating the body and the mind at the same time. And the combination of those two treatments leads to a disproportionate amount of healing. I'm not saying talk therapy doesn't work. I'm not saying it can't help. What I'm saying is a disproportionate level of healing comes when you treat both of the things wrong at the same time or in conjunction with each other. And there are Dr. Eugene Lipoff, who I mentioned is my partner in something else. He is, he invented the dual sympathetic reset for the nervous system reset, and he does multiple therapies. I mean, I'll give you an example. Everyone talks, I think it's pretty well known. You work in Hollywood, people talk about psychedelics, right? Mm-hmm. Veterans are all doing psychedelics. My buddy, I'm good friends with Marcus Capone, who runs Vets and has been doing Ibogaine. Yeah, Marcus is great. The thing is, everyone knows that the psychedelics are having a profound effect, but really no one talks about why. Like, why? Psychedelics? Well, it's because it's psychedelics. Okay, great. But what is that? What's the why? And to me, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but I'll just say it very simple. Psychedelics are physically putting the brain and body into an altered physical state to process trauma. It is physically. And if you don't believe it, get on mushrooms and you'll know that the physical changes happen, right? You'll be like, oh my God. But it is putting you into a physical state and allowing you to address trauma mentally in a way that you cannot do unless you are in that physical state. So again, I don't know a scientific way to explain it, but just logically, the reason psychedelics are working is because they're a combination of physical and mental, and that has a disproportionate effect. One guy that's been crushing it, and I forget the guy's name, unfortunately, but the guy who wrote The Body Keeps Score.
Yeah.
Great book, is continually being proven more and more accurate. I think as AI and everything increases, I think the body and brain connection of treating trauma will become the default mode, not the outlier that it currently is. That's my prediction.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. We're talking about a forged in chaos. We talked about self-awareness, the way you are now, like how your life shifted, the identities that you've taken on and all this stuff. But you also mentioned early on, like when you said, well, what does chaos look like? It could be drinking. It could be, driving a motorcycle 120 miles an hour, all this stuff, right? So here's 2 questions for you. Walk us, first of all, in order to be self-aware, usually something pivotal happens where you're like, oh my, what is that moment for you, like a rock bottom or something that you hit that had caused you to recognize this? And then how did you get through it? And then I'll ask you my follow-up question.
I think I'm maybe lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective on that. I stay in a pretty high state of constant self-awareness.
Okay.
I'm always evaluating myself. I mean, like I said, it's probably not good. It's probably, maybe I'm probably overly self-analytical on myself. So I've always been, a person that really thinks a lot about myself and what I'm thinking, and tries to give an outside perspective. That being said, even though I have stayed in a pretty constant state of that, absolutely, anytime something, as I say about rock bottom, I have a joke about rock bottom, which is you'll never know what your rock bottom was until you die, because you'll never know if you're going to go to another depth of rock bottom until, your life is over with. So I've hit multiple bottoms. I've had, I went to rehab. I got into a accident on my motorcycle, speaking of motorcycles, and pretty much each large negative thing that has happened to me has obviously forced me to take a deeper level of evaluation of myself. And to be perfectly honest, for a person that likes growth, there was a real risk in that. And here's what I mean by that. And if somebody's listening, maybe they identify with this, but I would allow myself to be exceedingly self-destructive as a mechanism for growth, because I saw over and over again that no matter how bad things got, it led to a deeper level of awareness and a lesson. No matter how bad things were, there was a really deep lesson that came from it. So I think I spent years and years and years, which by the way is obviously creating chaos, but I think I spent years really justifying self-destruction as a mechanism for growth. And so now in my life, it's how can I grow? How can I continue to grow through healthy ways, not destructive ways? And really what changed it was I got to the point on my self-destructive behavior with mainly with drugs that I realized, and I'm sure, if you talk to, I don't know, Robert Downey Jr., I'm sure he'll probably say the same thing, which is at a level of self-destruction, the reason I quit self-destruction is because I realized the only way to take it further was to actually die. And then I went, well, I'm not going to go that way. So I got to the point of self-destruction where I realized the only way I could take this further was to actually, self-destruct. And so that was when I knew. And also, quite frankly, there was also the reverse logic, which was, I haven't even tried self-improvement. I haven't even looked into it. You know what I mean? So I was like, if you look at how far I went down the self-destruction, yeah. I did learn a lot. I did grow a lot. That's all true. But then when I looked at like the self-improvement potential, I just realized that I hadn't even started down that road. And so I could start, and I would get much more improvement much quicker than going to such an extreme level of self-destruction.
Couple of questions in terms of like when I was doing some research on you, reading more about your book and what you got going on and stuff like that. You've mentioned that war doesn't end, it just moves inside your head. So yeah. How do you begin to fight that war differently? Like, what are the things that you do? Because, it's funny, we had Randy Weitenheimer on the show, and we had Green Beret, Brandon Langford on the show, and they both said similar things where it's like every single morning, you better wake up getting ready to go to war, because that's every single day you are going to war, and how you're starting that morning is really going to help you, because things are just going to happen, that are just completely out of your control. The plan is not going to go away. I mean, not going to go, your way. Yeah. And, you have to be ready for war. How do you begin to fight that war differently?
There's a lot of people, especially in the military, or I should say veteran community space, that kind of preach this military mentality of, wake up at 5 a.m., freaking get my sloppy ass to the gym. I got to run 5 miles. I got to beat my body. I got to, that's not my jam. It was. And what I realized though is, and this is going to sound crazy, but I didn't go to war with myself after I got out. I was at war with myself from the very beginning. What I now know is, there's two ways to go about life. And one is at war with yourself. And I did that for years and years and years. And I still struggle with it today. It's not something that changes like that. So again, it wasn't that the war against myself started when I got out. It was just, that's where when I had no external enemy, I just
Right,
went
yeah.
to I went to the default one that had been there the whole time. But in reality, my entire life, I was at war with myself. And
Right.
so
I feel like we all are. All of us.
the crazy thing is some people aren't.
Oh,
And here's what I mean by that
please.
is some people value themselves at a level that they truly aren't at war with themselves. They love themselves, they value themselves no matter what's happening in their life, in the world, in their environment. They go, I am okay with me, I'm happy with me, I love me, I value me, and everything outside of how I feel about myself is external. But nothing external is going to change how I feel about myself internally. I didn't have that value with myself growing up. And so I had to learn to try and give myself that value to stop the war. So at
Okay.
the end of the day, for me, it's waking up and it's about making sure that internally I value and love myself. Because if I don't value and love myself, and again, this is going to sound crazy, but the amount of destruction that comes from not loving yourself in your life is unfathomable. It is, I could give 10,000 examples
Yeah.
of from being manipulated by other people to being used by other people, or even just not even their fault, me giving too much, not setting boundaries, me being manipulated, allowing sociopaths and narcissists into my life because I didn't value myself. Oh, I'm going to be a good friend. I allowed people to hurt me. I allowed people to hurt me. I allowed things to destroy me because I didn't feel that I deserved anything better. So for me, the way that you fight that war is simply by loving and valuing yourself. Does that sound a little touchy-feely? Absolutely, it does. The irony that I think I know quite a few veterans, quite a few SEALs specifically, but Green Berets, everyone, being a veteran, at least today, is like being one person and hating this other person, and then you get out and suddenly you become that other person that you hated while you're in. You know what I mean? It's like I'm a hippie now. You know what I mean? I'm like all about touchy feely stuff. Psychedelics. Like that's not something when in my 20s that I would ever consider a mind opening experience. So all my friends now, we've seen both sides, and the lesson is loving yourself is the best side. It is the only way to go. And once you love yourself, you will do what's best for you, and you will not take any crap from anyone, to include the world. Because as you said, it is a war every day
Every day.
against the world.
Yeah.
And you cannot go to war against the world every day if you're at the same time at war with yourself.
Yes, 100%.
That's the key. So you have to be okay with yourself. You have to love yourself. And it for me, I can tell you, it is a daily process of reinforcing that love and that value that I have for myself. There's a million tricks which I won't get into, that are maybe in the book, but it's a constant process. It does not change overnight, especially when it was, created when you were younger and didn't really have the best logic filters. But now it's about, understanding and accepting your own value and worth. And I think that is absolutely imperative to having a happy life.
Yeah, 100%. It's so funny because I am so I look in the mirror and I say positive things, and it's just same thing with, oh, I did something yesterday, I forgot, and I was like, oh wow, I was with my brother and I was like, oh, good job, to myself, and he's like, did you just tell yourself good job? I go, well, no one else is. And he's like, and the thing is though is that I see other people around me, I have a cousin that won't go outside without a full face of makeup because of the flaws. And that's when I saw that. I was 16 when I saw that. And as I got older, I realized when I was wearing makeup in my 20s, I was like, oh my gosh, I understand, because it hides your flaw. You forget this face that you actually have. So that's when I stopped. I said, I'm not going to do that anymore because I want to love the face that I have. So then I just stopped wearing makeup. But it's just being able to recognize and understand, okay, this part is me being at war with me, and I can't, in order to go up against the universe, because that's a way bigger battle, right? And I want to know, because you did mention this part of this back when we were talking. You mentioned relationships. I want to know what, I think you said something about like the abilities that made you a superhero in war made you a supervillain at home. So
Yeah.
what did that look like in your relationships?
I think very simply, well, it's very complicated. So I'd say at its core, the easiest way
Mm-hmm.
to say it would be what comes with that basis is a massive amount of addictions. So
Okay.
addiction is an external way to try and control internal emotions. So generally, a person who's an addict has no internal way to regulate emotion. So they turn to external ways to regulate internal emotions. Generally, at least in my experience, most addicts are have some degree of addict behavior in across the board. So for me, what made me absolutely, well, I'll say an even more simple way to put it, which is very, very, very basic. But the simple way to say it was, there's no way you can love someone else if you don't love yourself. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
is the core basis of the problem. The other part about it is, creating chaos. If you don't know what you're doing, it will look like, it'll look like fun. It'll look like you're just having a good time, just blowing off steam, all these different things. So for me, in the past, I think the biggest mistake that I made in relationships, well, maybe mistake's not the right word, but the biggest problem, I guess, in relationships was that I fundamentally didn't feel worthy of love. And so any attempt to love me, I was going to push away. It's the easiest way to say it. How
Mm-hmm.
I would push it away, in every way you can think of, from cheating to substance abuse to just being unavailable, unemotional. You name it.
Mm-hmm.
Name a bad boyfriend behavior. I did them all. I'm saying this because, and I want to be very clear here. I'm not justifying my bad behavior. I've apologized to quite a few women that I've hurt in the past, but I do want to be clear and say that it's like there's a term, hurt people hurt people. And I think with age, as we get older, when you're younger, you're like, that person's a horrible person, that person's this, that person's crazy, blah blah blah. And then as you get older, you kind of go, I see where, I see why that happened, I see why they did that, I get it, I've done similar things. So it's like, for me now, looking back, I always knew that I wasn't a bad person, but I did a lot of bad things, and I, in relationships, and I hurt a lot of people because I didn't love myself. It's not an excuse for my behavior, but I do think it's worth noting that if you are in a relationship and you sense that person doesn't love themselves, it's not going to work. I'm sorry, it's not going to work. And then conversely, if you're a guy that's, let's say, in a relationship, and you fundamentally don't love yourself, you need to get out of that relationship, because you're just going to hurt them until you do love yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it took me years and
Yeah.
years to realize all those things. But I think a big problem in I mean, military relationships are you know are struggling. There's the divorce rate is out of control. All these different things. I think the core issue comes back to what I just said. It's easy to blame the symptoms when you don't. It's easy to blame the symptoms for the issue when you don't know what the disease is. And I think that's a problem in a lot of relationships that are. And then also, by the way, let's be honest with this: trauma bonding is a thing. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I can definitely say in my past, like, I was not interested in a woman unless she was broken like me. You know what I mean? And obviously, I didn't know that consciously,
Right,
but
right. Yeah, yeah,
subconsciously, you're
yeah.
choosing. You're choosing. And why are you choosing a broken person? Well, because if you know you're broken, then by choosing a broken person, you go, we're the same. This
Mm-hmm.
this relationship's okay because she's just as broken as I am. If you knew you were broken, you wouldn't choose an unbroken person, because they would have more. You wouldn't deserve them. and you would feel that. So
Right.
I chose broken people because I was broken. And again, I wasn't aware of it, but
right. Yeah.
I detail, by the way, I detail relationships quite a bit in the book. And I would go as far to say, debatably, but I would go as far to say the pattern that I noticed from my relationships was one of the things that really led me to a fundamental realization of the problem. So for me, I was lucky that I was seeing the same pattern in relationships. And so at a certain point, I was like, okay, by seeing a repeated pattern in my relationships, that kind of led me to the discovery of some of the core issues I was dealing with.
So for the final question on the show, what do you have for our listeners that we could do on a daily basis that builds our mental fitness, our grit, our resilience, so we can handle challenges better that come our way?
It's about daily, at the end of the day, it's about daily telling yourself that you can handle anything and truly believing that. And I'll give you a tip for accomplishing that, for lack of a better term.
Okay.
Which is so crazy when you think about it, but anyone that's, I don't know, in their 20s, I would say, how many times in your life there's a statistic that says, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I believe it's 80% of the things that we worry about don't happen. Mm-hmm. Of the 20%, I believe, that happen, it's like 70% of those things aren't nearly as bad as we expected. Right. So if you really look at the numbers, I forget, but I remember thinking it was like 5% of the things we worry about, are actually gonna require worrying or to a degree. But the biggest thing I'd say is true confidence comes from just knowing that whatever comes your way, you will handle it.
Okay. And
the fact that you're alive today proves that that's true. Short of death, it's not that big a deal. And it's just so true. So I think if we just accept that no matter what happens, you'll be okay. And that you'll always do the best you can. You'll always, try as hard as you can. It's just a fundamental acceptance at the end of the day that nothing is really that, nothing is that scary. And it really is true, no matter what it is on a long enough timeline. And on that note, too, this is another fact. I think it's true for me, and I think it's true for everyone. If you take the worst thing that's ever happened to you, so think of the worst thing that's ever happened to you, jump forward 5, let's just say 10 years. How did you view that thing in 5 or 10 years? Most people will say it became the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
But we don't think about it like that.
No,
but it's true, and it's true.
Think about it in 10 years.
Exactly. And then you look back and you go, God, that led to, that led to this, which led to this. And it's like every bad thing at the time ends up leading to something good. And we just don't look at it that way, even though it's like my arm, the worst thing that happened to me at the time, obviously. But now I look back and go, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I can say that truthfully for every, 5 major bad things that happened to me. I look back and go, those were the best things. So it's really what it comes down to is reframing your mind every morning when you wake up to be in a positive state, and to be in a positive state in association and reflection with yourself. I'm okay. I'll always be okay. I'll figure it out. I'll get through this. I'll make it work. I trust myself. I believe in myself. I love myself. And if you wake up every morning with that positive mindset about yourself, I can honestly tell you definitively your entire life will change.
Wow. Thank you so much. You were fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. No, thank you.
And thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, give us a rating. I want to know what you think of the show. And don't forget to come and join us on Substack. It's a really great time over on Substack. We got articles on mindset and resilience. We got podcast book chapters over there. It's great. Come on over, and thank you guys so much for listening. I will see you all next Wednesday.